Hey everyone, welcome to Building Babellion, the Oscars preview series of 2022. Hopefully we make this an annual thing. This is our first time around though, so let us know if you like it. We're going to cover each and every movie nominated for Best Picture at this year's Academy Awards, starting with Don't Look Up, as you can tell by the title. I'm here with Caleb Leanza. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Caleb Leanza. I have done interviews for this podcast over the summer, as well as you have, and I'm really excited because I've been looking to start watching new movies, and this is a pretty good one.
Yeah,
and this is a very good one to start off with. I know I didn't have that much expectations for this movie, not gonna lie, but I was pleasantly surprised.
All right, so we're gonna find out who wins this Oscar.
I hope to God. Sorry, just jumping right into this thing.
Yeah, so Don't Look Up is an American film directed by Adam McKay. It's distributed by Netflix. I believe a different producer initially had like the script rights to it, but Netflix saw it and was like, we're jumping on board. We're going to help produce this. So they basically bought it out. It's a longer film, I feel like, especially when I was watching it for the first time. I was like, man, this is kind of long and like dragging out. Second time around, I was like, okay, it's not as bad as I initially thought. And I feel like a lot of the Oscar movies currently, other than Belfast, are pretty long anyways. So kind of fits the mold, I guess you could say. And other nominations other than Best Picture are film editing for Hank Corwin, original score for Nicholas Britell, and original screenplay, which was Adam McKay's. So do you think these nominations fit the film?
I agree. I think they do. I think, should we predict who's gonna win the Oscar out of these three now?
I mean, we can. Yeah. You can predict it if you want. I think personally, after talking to some people, I got the impression that they actually didn't like the editing.
Really?
But I wanted to ask you about it, since you are a post-production major, what you thought about the film editing nomination.
I was just about to comment on the editing too. I thought it was different type of editing. I really like how it was edited because, I don't know, I feel like we've seen in Hollywood films a pretty cut and paste kind of way to edit, where it's just you have these cinematic pieces where it's, it looks good with film. You have I'm blanking on some Hollywood films that I just recently watched, but it's kind of like, I guess the Avenger movie series is kind of like cut and paste, kind of like that.
Very linear.
Yeah, it's like, all right, we have this like setup. Let's follow this setup, and that's going to lead.
Formulaic editing.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like I really love this editing because it was a breath of fresh air, because it's, I don't know, I just really was drawn into it and how they use titles, and I really love how they use screenshots within, how they do like that pause.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout
definitely.
it.
There were definitely freeze frames and like stills that weren't like in moments you'd really expect. Like, it can obviously be cheesy, like when someone jumps and then freeze frame, fade out, whatever. You have that. There's like a 90s shtick, I feel like. But in this, it was like, even in like the end of it, when the comet was hitting Earth and they were just in the dining room and you could start to feel things vibrating. There was like one shot, I think may have been a Leo, but also could have been someone else, where he started saying something and then it was just freeze frame for like maybe a second, and then moved on to the next like cut, I guess.
If I'm to be completely honest, which at this moment, why not? I actually like the junky taste of store-bought better than homemade.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me. No.
And I thought it was very interesting. Also, I think a lot of people may have not liked that editing because it was very like in your face and jarring. Like, you're conscious of it. Whereas like what we've seen from formulaic Hollywood movies is like, you get lost in it. You're not really supposed to be conscious of the actual editing itself. But this film was very engaging in the way they edited. They wanted you to notice it, definitely, especially in the like the montage sequences as well.
And then with it was like one of the first scenes too. I forget what they were like talking about, but it was like some company about like the space or whatever, and it was like, oh wait, this is actually like a company, and they like put up the company's logo, and it's like, oh, this is actually a company. I honestly really love that style, and this is probably one of my like favorite films that I've seen that was edited like this, because yeah, I just love this type of editing because it's like kind of more experimental too, because they had like when it was kind of coming to the end, like the bees, the animals, kind of life in general with like just people, how they interact, like it's like all of this is going to go away due to like this like comet coming down and destroying everything. And I just really like that kind of editing because it, even though it may take you out of the movie, it's like, oh wow, this is like edited. I kind of like that aspect because it's something new, something fresh. And
it's good. I feel like it's definitely good for people who are technically interested in filmmaking. I think it definitely, because I feel like if you are invested in filmmaking, you're already kind of not so engaged with a movie. Like maybe you're engaged in the story, but at the same time, you're very conscious of the technical decisions because that's kind of your livelihood. That's something you've studied a lot about. So I think this was kind of like inviting to those type of that sort of audience. So I can see why the Oscars would give it a nod. I'm not too sure how often they do choose nonlinear editing for their nominations, or even if they end up winning it in the end. Because I do feel like they award good editing that is in the clean cut Hollywood style where you're not really supposed to see it. It's invisible. You know, I feel like a lot of the Academy will reward that. And I feel like they did nonlinear editing in a very different way, because we've seen it in films where it's like it's going throughout a story and every now and then it will jump back to an earlier scene, but like an earlier scene that was like a while ago, I guess, in the plot. And this, it was scene A. Let's say it was the debriefing in the White House where the technology guy, I'm forgetting characters' names. Technology guy was talking about all the minerals on the meteor. And then Leo, his character, took the other people out to a bar where they started to talk about it, and that was scene B. And they were like pretty long takes of those two sequences of scene A not cut into at all, and then scene B not cut into at all. And then all of a sudden you started getting intercut of scene A, scene B, scene A, scene B as they were discussing the meeting that had happened. So I thought that was a very interesting way to go about it. I just don't see that too often, and it was like very jarring because it makes you feel like scene A is done for. Like you've already seen as much as you would see from that scene, but then they kept going back to it. And this sort of like formula, I guess, kept coming up throughout the film, especially because they're balancing different characters, especially towards the end with the dinner scene and then the launch scene at the same time, overlapping. I think it was well done, but at the same time, I can understand if you're a casual audience how it could be frustrating. Because especially the way they like jumped right into it. I mean, Janet, who we were watching it with, noticed that. I was like, oh, she mentioned she'd rather see some character building before they discover the actual meteor. But I, as a film major, maybe this is just my personal opinion from it being a breath of fresh air. I like to see it where they're put into the conflict and then you see what their characters are. Like their character is built through the conflict rather than leading up to the conflict. Because that it's very much different than like the typical like hero's journey, you know, like we see the backstory of these characters and then they're thrown into conflict and then we see how that plays out. Instead, it's like we don't see the backstory, but we just see them thrown into it and how they just like scramble. Because like there's a lot of high intense emotions throughout this film, which is how it's supposed to be in an apocalyptic event. So I thought the acting was really good. I didn't think any of them would end up winning or even getting nominated for an acting award because typically comedic films like this don't really get recognized for their acting so much. Usually it's the dramas, but I felt like there was a good emotional range for the actors in this film. Like enough for Jennifer Lawrence, Leonardo DiCaprio, Timothy Chalamet, Meryl Streep, Jonah Hill. You can go on and on. Enough for all of them to get on board with it, because Timothy Chalamet even mentioned that he didn't want to do that character until they added his religious element to it, because he needed a role with a bit of depth. And they decided like, oh, we haven't really talked about religion through this movie so far when they're writing it. So they added it in, and then Timothy Chalamet was like, okay, that's what I want to do. So I think they did a good job at bringing out depth in these characters when it, at its core, is a funny movie.
So yeah, I just have a couple last notes on the editing too. With it being more of experimental, this kind of gave me like hope in the industry, because my main focus within editing or post-production is experimental and or documentary, and that's like my strong suit. But within Hollywood, you don't really see narrative films that are like experimental, or experimental films in general. You don't really see that within Hollywood. And I was like, crap. I'm like, I want to like kind of have a taste within Hollywood, but there's not really any room for me to have success with experimental film. And not necessarily, this isn't like an experimental film per se. It's more narrative.
It has elements.
Yeah.
There are sequences, like almost felt like collage sequences, like especially when the meteor was like landing. I shouldn't say landing, when it was crashing into Earth. It felt like there are all these like cuts to like nature, and then like different humans, and just different reactions to people looking at this event. And then there are other times where I felt like it wasn't even them reacting to an event, it's just like showing off the human condition almost. I don't really have a better way of putting it, but it just felt very like montagey and collage, which is like a lot of what experimental films are. Like they experiment with the editing, of course, but then how they can associate two different images together. And I felt like we saw a lot of those sort of sequences in this film, but it also didn't take away from the actual narrative.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I like really love the editing of this. And to the Oscar, I this is not going to get nominated, or this isn't going to win for film editing, just solely for the fact that it's not the cut and dry narrative aspect. I mean, I honestly would be surprised if this wins an Oscar for film editing. And
I mean, every now and then they surprise us, and all of a sudden they change their whole mindset about how they feel about these sort of, I guess, edits, or just like in general. Like no one thought Parasite was going to win because it was a foreign film or whatever. And then, Oscar continually adapts to how they go about nominating and voting on things. So they could surprise us. This could be the year that a film like this does actually win, which I think is somewhat deserving. I'm not sure. Still have to like rewatch some of the other films to really understand, or like see if they hold up to Don't Look Up, I guess. But I think it was deservedly nominated at the least.
I agree. And I'm loving kind of the direction where Hollywood's taking, or I guess these media companies with Netflix and other like Hulu and stuff are kind of taking direction of film with this more laid back kind of technique of producing film and TV shows. Because you said this during the film with Jonah Hill, most of his lines were improv.
Drought, famine, hole in the ozone is so boring.
And that kind of gave, there are aspects where actors are mainly improv, but I felt like that kind of brought another element to this film where I kind of felt the laid back is like, we are doing this film because we love making film, and we're solely doing it because we love film. And I love how like the acting of Leo and Jennifer were, because it's like we never really see this aspect of kind of like that laid back kind of behavior. And I also love how they brought in this new element of like planet killer comet coming down to the Earth and kind of wiping out the entire population, because these comet kind of sci-fi movies are usually always dramatic, like intense 24/7, but we've never really seen a comedic side of this like comic destroying the entire world. And I just thought that was a unique take, and I love how kind of laid back it was. And I feel like it's kind of I love being more laid back and just filming and making movies for the love of it, rather than just making millions upon millions of dollars. I feel like the industry is very heavily based on how many billions of dollars this is going to make, rather than just the love of it. I'm not saying like there's obviously love within each movie, Hollywood movie, but I feel like it's mainly geared towards making that biggest buck where I felt as
Yeah.
this film, it was
Especially in the editing,
Yeah.
because like I feel like I said earlier, when I first watched it, I felt like it was dragging on, but maybe that is just because I'm so conditioned to the Hollywood movies not dragging on for the sake of not wanting their audience to fall out of it.
Mhm.
They want to keep it engaging at all times. Like it has to be high intensity throughout the entire thing, whether that be through like whatever emotion, whether that be romance or not. And I feel like, yeah, they didn't really play into those stereotypes of like how you would usually see a lot of these apocalyptic things happen, like the budding romances that happen around apocalyptic events. Like the romances that were highlighted in here were like very flawed and obviously like not very cheesy or like forced. It was just like, I mean, Jennifer Lawrence literally like said, "Fuck it," I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Or like, sure, yeah, we can make out, whatever.
Mhm.
You know, like it was very. I felt like that it was very real and not very cheesy, not playing into the stereotypes.
Mhm.
And so that's why I think it was a really good screenplay, because it balanced the emotions that come with an apocalyptic event that would be very real with also just allowing it to be a comedy at heart as well.
I agree. And what was the one movie that just came out about the school shooting?
Oh, you're talking about Fallout?
Yeah, Fallout. Sorry, this is like a little tangent, but like Fallout is apparently like the quote unquote Gen Z like movie that's supposed to define like our generation of Gen Z. But I feel like this movie does. I haven't seen Fallout, so granted I can't really make that comparison. But I feel like this movie like defined Gen Z
Yeah, I
the
remember you
most.
saying that.
Like mid movie I told you that, and I just feel like just because of like not always constantly looking at our phones, always engulfed into media, and media just trying to get the most views, the most likes, even when there's a comment coming down. And I really like that aspect because I like 95% of the movie I was completely frustrated with like the events that was happening solely because like they actually happen within real life, and I just got so infuriated with it because just for that fact of like this movie is this is like 100%
it's rooted in this is how we would react.
Yeah.
And the sadness of how we would react, basically, and the ridiculousness of it. But obviously, there are factors behind it that, like, at our foundation of how we built our society, we depend on the money and just like our impressions on others, like how the president was trying to keep up her votes and all of that to keep her in office. And that's the main reason why she finally agreed to help out with the cause, you know. You know, I feel like that it just revealed like humanity's biggest flaws, especially America's, because it was rooted, like the whole movie was basically in America. It involved some world relation stuff, but not too much. It was very much an American movie. It was American storytelling and also American perspective, you know, because a lot of the political references, especially. So, yeah, I think I think it deservedly got a nomination for original screenplay. I'm not sure if it'll win any of these, honestly. Maybe score, but I'm not too sure on that either. I don't think it'll win Best Picture just because I feel like it's too out there, maybe too comedic for the likings of the Academy. But I mean, to see it just get nominated, and a lot of people really felt like it wasn't just one of the fringe nominees either. It was just like, yeah, it was a solid like 5 or 6 ranking on most critics' predictions. So
what did you think about the score, because you're kind of more into the audio side of film?
So I thought the score was very interesting and dynamic, because especially a score works off of a good screenplay, and the screenplay was comedic at heart but also had a large range of emotions, as it is supposed to, considering that's an apocalyptic event we're talking about. And so the score, like from the very beginning, like the opening credits, I would say, like it had like a theme that I can only compare to like 30 Rock, the show, where it's like very upbeat and kind of jazzy, very New York rooted. So Nicholas Britell did a good job with that. And then also throughout the rest of the movie, you would hear snippets of kind of like stereotypical like intense themes that you would hear in actual other apocalyptic movies that are very like droning and deep and not as upbeat to try and like build the suspense of the movie. You would hear that every now and then, but at the same time it balanced that with completely the opposite, which was like a 30 Rock inspired theme. At least it sounded like to me. And so, I mean, I kind of just applaud the ability to do that because that is not easy to do. You would almost think that they're like two different movies or two different genres merging, and that doesn't always work. But somehow it did. And then there was also the original music that played a good hand into it, with Ariana Grande and Kid Cudi doing their whole concert scene. And then you also had Bon Iver's little song at the end as the earth exploded, I guess. I mean, that was really cool. I did like his song throughout the end credits. Yeah, I just think it was a good score at the end of the day. And I'm not sure if it'll win it at the same time, because I think Oscars will reward a score that has more continuity and doesn't jump around too much. Even though I say it did a good job at jumping around, maybe the Oscars will look at it and say like, let's go with something that is more cohesive. But at the same time, this is a well-renowned composer, so I wouldn't be surprised if they just gave it to him anyways. Yeah.
Would you say that the type of music that was interlaid, or just the score in general, is kind of more of the experimental type, or is it more leaning towards the narrative?
Yeah, I definitely don't think it was experimental at all. Which is very interesting, because there were all these different sequences that you could refer to as being inspired by experimental film. But I don't think there's really at any point. I mean, he has made some experimental music or scores for shows and films. Like, he has the ability to do that, but he chose not to. And I think it kept it rooted, because while the editing was very like, it could get experimental, at least you had a different element. Like the sound design was not so experimental, so at least you still were engaged, and you didn't feel too lost in what was in the direction of the movie. You didn't feel like it was jumping around too much. So even though I feel like it mixed two different genres of scores, at the same time it wasn't ever experimental. They were very like, they both versions of the score, the 30 Rock and the droning apocalyptic and intense score, both of those are very like familiar themes that you would see, or I should say here. So yeah. I didn't think it ever like strayed away from a familiarity.
That's really interesting, because it's kind of like very of that two worlds colliding too.
Yeah, definitely.
With like very narrative, but also very experimental, quote unquote. And this movie reminded me of Guardians of the Galaxy, with kind of, because I feel like Guardians of the Galaxy experimented with editing, where you don't really see that kind of style of editing. I mean, it's very narrative like driven, but I feel like there's elements within Guardians of the Galaxy, both movies, that are straight away from the normal Avenger movie. And I think that's why a lot of people love Guardians with the Galaxy, because it brought with the music and score elements, with just how brilliant they were, with Groot dancing in the beginning. I think that was number 2, and I forget what's his name?
Star-Lord?
Yeah, Star-Lord dancing with that one fighting scene too. I think that was number 1, but I don't know. I just kind of, or that's why I fell in Guardians with the Galaxy, because of the different elements that they brought with editing.
Definitely.
And I feel like both movies aren't necessarily similar, but I love how they both kind of experimented with different styles of editing that we've never really seen in Hollywood before.
Yeah. I think Netflix did a good job at picking this up and making sure it saw the vision that Adam McKay originally had. Because, I mean, a lot of producers would be wary about what Adam McKay was trying to accomplish with this, but Netflix has been good at taking chances, especially, I mean, when it's Adam McKay and like the cast and all of that. It's like, it's hard to say no anyways, but I feel like, I mean, Netflix has gone wrong in the past by giving a lot of money to, Oscar potential movies that don't exactly see it through, and it ends up being kind of a mess. Like that has happened to Netflix before, but they still take the chances, and as a result, we end up with a good piece of film like this.
I agree. I guess kind of like the final thought that I wanted to touch on too was that another like element of the screenplay that I loved with, I may be reading this a little bit too far, but not really, because I feel like this was very vibrant of a theme of comparing like the comment with COVID, just kind of how the America reacted to the comment and how America is actually reacting to COVID and stuff. How it got very political, you know, with references of like towards the end with Donald Trump with like the MAGA kind of like red hats and stuff with rallying around like the president and be like, don't look up, like we're not going to look.
Basic science political. It definitely did a good job at highlighting that.
Yeah, and there's another scene that stood out too with the Leo's family's wife, or like his house, his wife's house, or like at his house, but they had like an American flag, and then the house over had like a pride flag too, which was kind of like the polar opposites. Not saying that like Leo was definitely like Republican at all means, but it was kind of like another divide.
Yeah, it's not even so much of a divide. I mean, you could say stereotypically, you could see that as a divide, but it's also just like kind of flaunting your beliefs and how you want to portray yourself. That is a very American idea, especially when you think about campaigning, like the signs in the front yard. Like that is a very American rooted thing. So I feel like, definitely it was a good piece of production design from Don't Look Up to make sure they included that. And then going back to COVID, I feel like Adam McKay also had this idea even before COVID. I haven't like looked into it to see if anyone's interviewed him about it or confirmed it, but just from climate change and global warming, which Leonardo DiCaprio is big on. He has been huge on speaking out about that, advocating for different methods of power and just sustainable practices within businesses, which has also made him a controversial figure, especially I know Fox News has consistently targeted him for speaking out about it and stuff like that. So I feel like Adam McKay had that idea even before COVID. It was like, okay, I could play on this with the comment or something like that. And then as soon as COVID happened and you saw a whole new way of science being politicized, it was just like, okay, there's just so many different ways we can play off of it. Like it could be a global warming thing. It could be not even trusting the government as far as like the moon landing. Like there's all these different ways you could play on the idea of science or anything being politicized and being for one's personal gain, despite the inevitable outcome of it being bad for humanity. You know, just like how dehumanized almost we've gotten because we're so worried about the franchising and the politics and being PC and keeping things upbeat and fun, which we saw with like that morning show, I guess you could call it, and Sesame Street. Like, oh, let's make sure like we talk about, you know, negative things in a good light. You know, that was definitely a big point with like the media, and they were saying like, no, sometimes it's just bad news.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this is why one of the film is like so frustrating too, because it's like we're literally like COVID is a real thing, but people are saying that it's not a real thing. It's like, and obviously, or
something not to be worried about.
Yeah. And with this comment, like you can, there's like this comment is obviously coming, but people are still not believing in it. And last thing to kind of wrap it off too, because I said that was the last thought, but it's not. But Leo's character arc, like I went from loving him to hating him and loving him again, but it's like he got trapped into the media kind of storm, so I can't really hate him, but I'm still hating him because he still cheated on his wife and he did like all these bad things. But then I also don't hate him because it's like the media kind of getting him to that media trap where he got caught up in all of this attention and stuff, and then he went around and did a 180, just kept doing 180s. But
and his last line was actually improvised.
Really?
Apparently, because they wanted to find like an emotional depth to like end on before they all like house exploded, I guess. And And when he said like, we really had it all, or we had everything, didn't we? Or something along those lines. That was apparently improvised, and they nearly cut it out because when they're editing, they felt like it was almost too emotional. Like they got too worked up over it. They're like, okay, maybe this is too much. But then they ended up including it. So, which I think was good. I actually really like that bit.
I'm glad that they added that in. I'm not the biggest fan of the last scene though. But
In general?
yeah, it's just I don't know. I just didn't like how they edited the background and stuff.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So do you want to end it here?
Yeah, let's end it here. Thanks for watching. Tune in to the next 9 episodes for our thoughts on the other nominees for Best Picture. Overall, we're thinking like it's probably not going to get it, but you know, it was good that it got nominated in general.
Yeah, I'm very happy that I got nominated, and thank you for watching. If you made it this
thanks
far.
for watching.
Bye.